Your house just flooded, and you've got a huge mold problem in the walls, in the floor. What are you going to do? You have a huge mold problem somewhere else, some other circumstance, and it's going to cost you thousands, or maybe you have to tear down the house. Maybe you were away from your house and you came back and you found 4 feet of water in the basement. What are you going to do? I'm going to talk about ozone generators, ozone therapy, and related subjects here. Now, these are going to be real stories I'm going to tell right off the front of this video. We're going to get into the application, the solution, and the health effects with being harmed by ozone and being harmed by mold. And you can consult your medical authorities to find out what the truth is. I'm sure actually they will actually agree with a lot of what I'm saying here. But otherwise count this as entertainment if you want, or whatever. So I just came back from Canada, my parents' house. A month ago, about a foot of water dropped down in less than an hour, maybe 45 minutes. It overloaded the highway, drainage systems, and burst open in my parents' neighborhood. And a huge tsunami came down all the backyards into their house and the neighbors' houses. And probably billions of dollars of damage was done when you consider all the many neighborhoods that were affected. All their appliances were ruined, and even when I went there a month later, you see them all out on the side of their house. Some of the houses had to be dug up. It was so bad. Anyway, within a few days, it was really humid at that time too. Within a few days, there was mold everywhere, people's houses, and water was still there. The neighbor across the street didn't even know it happened, comes there 4 days later. He's got 4 feet of water in his basement. So everything in the basements were ruined. So what do? Well, they quoted $75,000 damage to the house, to the basement, and all the, because you got to remove all the drywall and everything. So what are you going to do? So I went there. I forgot to bring my ozone generator, and we're going to talk about what that is, what it does. But I want to give you some stories, because almost anybody can resonate with these stories in some way or another. And it's a very easy solution to deal with. So my mother says to me, like I said, well, first of all, she stored a lot of stuff that she went down immediately and got out and put in the garage. And then when the guys came to do the cleanup, they put a few more things there, and they took the rest away, which now I found out that they had to throw all that they took away into the garbage. So anyway, my mother wanted me to bring some stuff, because they just finished doing the basement, bring some stuff back in that was in the garage. The garage had been closed up, but the stuff was wet. And so what happened was, I said, I can't, I opened the door and it's almost like an instant headache. So this is something we can't go in there, right? Unless you get an ozone generator and we do this, I'm not going to do that. You know, my sister had helped out in the early days and got sick, you know, and I told her, you should never have done that. It's really unsafe, and it's really nasty if you get these lung infections from that. That's going to be really bad for you. So she didn't really want to do it, and she's like, I don't know about that, whatever. And I said, well, think about it. You know, I teach on this subject. This is important. So she agreed. I said I was just going to buy it for her anyway, and just do it. So we got there the next day. We put it on for a day, and she knew how bad it was in there. The smell was completely gone. Now you could still smell the ozone. Like I got up early in the morning and I opened the garage door and let it air out for a long time. But you couldn't, even when I opened the door, I could not smell the former smell, only the ozone. The ozone is pretty sharp. It's hard to describe what it is, but it's a very sharp smell when it's concentrated. So you don't want to breathe it ever. I'm going to say that over and over again. Do not breathe the ozone. I'll describe what it is and how it works in a minute. I'm just giving you some stories here because people want stories. So then I eventually left a day or so later. She did the crawl space where the water had come in. It was the worst in there, and she said, I don't smell anything now after that. Like she turned it off and let it revert back to oxygen was what happens within, depending on how much air flows in there, within a short period of time, at least a couple of hours to maybe a day. If it's all sealed up, it will still be like that for a while, the smell of ozone. So anyway, so then she just texted me a few hours ago saying, look at this. So there were some bins in there that we didn't open up when we ozoned the garage with the stuff. And so I opened a couple of them up and I was like, whoa, there it is, the smell again, because it can't get in through a sealed container. And so I thought, let's throw this stuff away. That's what everybody else would do. She said, no, I'd like to try and ozone that now. So she just sent me the pictures. She makes all these different things, crafts and figurines and what have you. She does quilting. And so the fabric on these little figurines was full of mold. And she said it's all gone now. Like after she did it again another day in the garage after I left with that stuff open, again the smell was gone. And I was amazed. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting there still to be debris on the little outfits of these figurines. So anyway, that's one story. The story of this house is that I moved in here. Well, I started renting this place, and what happened was it was in the summertime where I got the lease, and they had the windows open and everything. I went downstairs and there was some musty smell, but we just kind of walked through it because there was nothing down there and walked back up. But when I moved in the cold, it was really bad in here. And I was stuck in this lease now. The landlord wouldn't do anything about it. And I found out that the previous tenants had dogs in the basement. And the landlords had spent like tens of thousands of dollars cleaning up the problems in this house. And so what happened was, they weren't willing to do anything. No, they said there's no smell in here. Oh wow, thanks. So then I'm like calling around all the different places. What do I do about this? Because they had done a partial cleanup and then kind of covered it over, but it was in the concrete and the walls and the floors and all that down the basement. So they were saying thousands and thousands of dollars it's going to cost you. And this house was just sinking me and zapping all my time. It was terrible. Worst experience ever. And so what happened was ozone came up again. And I knew about ozone already. One of my good customers is in real estate, and he has quite a few properties, like buildings and apartments. And so what he has done and showed us that he would put an ozone generator in a house that was tons of mold in it for 2 days, close it up, seal it up, and then you have to turn the thing off and then let it sit for a while before you go in there. And then it kills everything, even into the walls. Wherever it can get through a crack, it can actually get into the walls and still do that too. So I did the same thing. I sealed up the basement as best I could, and I killed it. And it took a bit of time. I had to do 2 24-hour periods at a time, because some of it was getting through the ozone and you can't really be in the house. So you have to stop it once it starts getting through any kind of sealed up area. So I did that here and it worked. And I noticed that it was still continuing to work long after you couldn't smell the ozone. There was still some kind of reaction taking place. So another story, so going back to my parents' situation, it was well over, it was into the billions of dollars. Their houses there are $1 million in Canada, right? They're really, their money's different than America here. And so if you calculate the whole neighborhoods that were destroyed, they were quoting my mother $75,000, and she only had 3 inches of water in the basement. Others had like 4 feet, 5 feet of water. And her whole basement wasn't completely destroyed, but most of it was. So other people were in it for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you multiply that. There was one street that all the houses have to be bulldozed down now. It was so bad there. Now, if people had known about this, there would have been millions and millions of dollars of saved property. So we'll talk about that application in a bit. There's another story, one more story I want to tell that prompted me to do this video. And because it's going to save people's lives. And I'm just saying that as a guess, opinion, whatever you want to call it, not medical advice here. So what happened was, I was with a friend, an Amish friend of mine. We were in an Amish home, and they were selling that home. They were actually auctioning it off. And there was renters there, and they told us there's mold in this house. Of course, that was noticeable as soon as we went in there. And so what happened was, I started telling them about ozone and the dangers of the mold and all that. And they were telling me that they're sick, and they were getting rashes that wouldn't go away. So, I told them about this, and then the guy who was selling the place wanted to know too. And so they took down information. Now, just before I forget, I got these on Amazon, and there's a bunch of different ones. We'll get into the details of that. But I need to find a source where people can go to, like the Amish, that they don't use the internet to find that out, to be able to order them. I think what we'll do is probably provide them for people. So I'm going to get into some applications, but with that story, like people, if they subject themselves to mold, they're going to have severe health problems and premature death. And and I think if people were aware of this, like if they really made this a big focus to teach everybody and show an easy solution. I know it's difficult because it's dangerous to inhale ozone. So some people are going to get themselves hurt because they're not going to know about the dangers And so I guess it's a tricky matter to get into. That's why I'm going to be very cautious here, and be very careful to bring out the dangers. Let's go on into the next phase. What is ozone? Essentially, it's two atoms, or three atoms. So oxygen is two oxygen atoms becoming a molecule, which is still pretty reactive, right? So if you cut some fruit, like an apple or a banana, and you leave it out into the air, it will oxidize. It'll turn brown pretty quickly. That's the oxidization. But ozone is three atoms of oxygen, and they're a lot more unstable, so they're going to connect up to everything around them. And so they're going to kill living, all life, right? It will be killing it according to the concentration of it. So I want to read, just typically right off, typing in ozone, first thing that came up on Google. So let me read this to go over it, and then I'm going to get into some history. I'm going to go over Tesla's patent here on ozone generation. So he was the one that patented it. He didn't invent it, he patented it. And then we're going to talk about the violet ray device again, because that does produce ozone as well, but in very small quantities. So what is ozone, and how does ozone work? So when someone asks, what is ozone, your first thought is probably the Earth's protective ozone layer that shields us from the sun's harmful ultraviolet rays. That's the ozone we are most familiar with, but ozone isn't found only in the atmosphere. It occurs quite readily in nature and is formed from oxygen molecules. Two atoms of oxygen form the basic oxygen molecule that is essential to life. Ozone is a molecule composed of three atoms of oxygen. Ozone is created when the two oxygen atoms are broken apart through an electrical charge into a single atom, then reattached to another two atoms oxygen molecule. So in nature, this process is created through one of two methods, and we can do this. I'm going to say another method that they don't talk about actually. The first is corona discharge, most often as a result of lightning strikes that occur during thunderstorms. Many people probably recognize the smell of ozone, the fresh, clean spring rain aroma that we notice after a storm, that is most often a result from nature's creation of ozone. The second method of ozone creation is ultraviolet light. Through this method, oxygen in the presence of the sun's UV light can be broken down and reformed into ozone. So now, at least a similar process is waterfalls. And this is one reason to have a little tiny miniature waterfall in your house. My son just bought one that he put in his apartment because I recommended it. And it's nice frequencies too, and negative ion experience too. When the water collides with itself, it then produces a healthful benefit. And you know it, you feel it, there's something refreshing. Maybe you've got more mist in the air too and all that. I was talking about doing a mister. I gave him a little tiny mister. So what happens is it's God's way of cleansing the earth. And so we're going to get into that in this article here. But I want to stress that it is natural. But we're going to do it in an unnatural way, artificial way. But it's actually the same process of the first lightning corona discharge. So when you think of the Tesla coil with the donut on top and the corona going all off there, there's so that right there is producing ozone. And so in a lightning strike, the lightning through the air coming down is going to create the ozone immediately wherever it passes. And so where it strikes and different phenomena like that is going to create ozone. But also the infrared from the sun. So why use ozone? Sometimes marketed as activated oxygen, is naturally unstable because of the third oxygen atom. That means ozone is extremely reactive. One atom can easily split from the other two atoms of oxygen molecule and attach itself to the other substances or organisms, or your lungs. This instability makes ozone one of the most powerful sterilizers in the world. Once ozone is produced by an ozone generator, it can attach itself to a pollutant, often long-chain carbon organic molecules, and break down their chemical structure into less complex and typically harmful molecules through oxidation. Oxidation enables ozone to destroy airborne and waterborne bacteria, viruses, molds, and odors. Ozone is most widely known for odor eliminating abilities because it also is a powerful water treatment option. It is also a powerful water treatment option. So I'm in the research and development of water purification and hydrogen systems, in the form of free energy systems too. So I'm highly interested in solving the world's pollution problems because we've already solved all the battery pollution problems in the world already. And that is not recognized, of course, but all the other pollution problems are all solved as well. In fact, all the problems in this world have long been solved, including cancer and all that stuff, right? So they have all been solved, and that's another detailed, well, more than one subject to get into. So anyway, let's go on with this article. When compared with other disinfection options such as chlorine, ozone offers numerous advantages. First, ozone can eliminate most pollutants far quicker than chlorine. Second, while chlorine has a lower initial investment, the monthly cost for chlorine is much higher than most ozone applications. Well, that's not even accurate at all because this doesn't cost anything. This is so little electric that, and how fast it works, there's no comparison. Like I was going to be paying $5,000+ to have all these chemicals, and they said we're not even sure if it's going to still do the job. So, yeah, so that's an understatement. So what are ozone generators? So how do we capture ozone from the environment? Because ozone reverts to oxygen over a short period, ozone cannot be captured naturally or prepackaged and delivered in tanks. Ozone generators, often referred to as ozone machines, produce ozone by adding energy to oxygen molecules, which causes the oxygen atoms to separate and recombine other O2 molecules. Just like in nature, they do this in one of two ways. So I was going to be doing a big major deal with a company that was producing, the best form of water purification in the world, as far as I'm aware. And a big part of that was ozone. And so I was going to be producing something that allows for the energy usage to produce the ozone would be zero, would be nothing, right? And it's, if you can create a Tesla coil that runs itself for free and you're blowing air through it, past it, you've got yourself an ozone generator. So we can do that fairly easy. with very little expense. So corona discharge. These machines produce ozone through a method equivalent to lightning with electrical energy or miniature lightning bolts. Streamers, right? They don't really know the language here, but it's streamers and corona, as they already mentioned. This method is commonly used in high volume ozone applications. And then of course, so what we'll talk about here is this patent on ozone generation here. So typically we have your primary and secondary coil here. So we have the secondary as the longer coil, and the primary is in the middle around it, or either inside it, but usually around it. And then we have a capacitor here, and then we have a tunnel here. So the output from the secondary is going to like usually, like I'll show you over in a minute, an example where you have two either sides. In this case it's a tube, and so you'd have two different metals that have either side of the secondary, and then you have a fan blowing air through it. So it's all straightforward. It's not very complicated. So here is an example. So that's from Tesla's patent 568177. So if you're looking at Google, you type in US 568177, and they usually have an A after that for American patents. And you can look up that for free online. So here's an example of our of something that we use for creating free hydrogen fuel to use as heat, or in fact put into your car. So this is coming from Stanley Meyer ideas, where you're not using the ambient air, but you're creating a very reactive air going into your combustion chamber. And talk to your expert mechanic before you experiment with such things as this. So this produces high volume of ozone, higher than that. And then of course the air that you blow through it will determine how concentrated the ozone is, because the faster the airflow, the less concentrated it will be. So this is not too expensive. So then there was another application I was thinking of mentioning, but I can't remember now. Besides this violet ray, which we'll get into afterwards. So we're, yeah, I was going to say one more thing, I totally forgot it now. So just blowing the air through electrical discharge, it's high frequency, high voltage, will create this ozone. So again, ultraviolet radiation, going back to this paper online here, this process of ozone generation, ultraviolet radiation, is comparable to how the sun's ultraviolet radiation splits O2, oxygen molecules, to form individual oxygen atoms. This process is considered to be less efficient than corona discharge. So, there are two important factors to consider when choosing an ozone generator. First is determining the correct size ozone generator. Second is making sure that you can accurately monitor and control the ozone levels. The specifics of your application determine correct system sizing. Often that can be accomplished with our existing models. Well, this is, I guess, some company selling something. So is ozone harmful? Ozone is attractive as an alternative to chemical processes like chlorine, which presents significant safety challenges. But monitoring ozone levels is necessary to ensure a safer process. Low-level exposure to ozone has not been shown to present long-term health problems. In fact, ozone has been given a GRAS, generally recognized as safe, approval by the USDA and the FDA for direct contact with food products, including all meat and poultry products, meat and human consumption. However, high levels of ozone in the air we breathe can be harmful. Breathing high levels of ozone can trigger a variety of health issues, including chest pain, coughing, throat irritation, airway inflammation. Long-term exposure can cause damage to lung tissue. Therefore, ozone levels should be monitored closely when using ozone in an occupied space. In any ozone implementation where people are present, it's important to make sure safety protocols are followed and proper ventilation is used. So, my son moved into a place that was an apartment building and it was full of smoke, and he even had painted over the walls and everything. So he asked about the ozone generator, and I said, well, it's going to be difficult because you're going to have to seal up the vents so that none of the ozone goes next door. And I said, if you're going to use it, stand out in the hallway and turn it off once you can actually smell it out in the hallway, because you don't want the neighbors, having exposure to that. And then I said, make it so that you can just turn it off, and then you want to let it sit for a while in there because you want it to revert back to oxygen before you go in there. Or you could hold your breath and open the windows and go back out without breathing it in. But ideally, like I said with my mother, put the extension cord outside of the room so that you can plug it outside, and then you never have to go into the room. So that's some things to know. So I see ozone products that you put in your kitchen or bathroom where people leave them plugged in. I'm not really comfortable with that because it will just continue accumulating. Now, if it's very small quantities, maybe it won't be able to accumulate. It'll just do a little bit, and so it's a very dicey matter. You probably have a lot of liability in selling ozone generators because sure, you bought it, you understand the instructions, but the next person who tries to use it doesn't know the instructions or the dangers and might really harm themselves. So it's a very tricky matter. I think more people's lives will be benefited and saved even than those who get harmed by it for not bothering to read instructions or knowing them. So there's another story. I had one of these violet ray devices that I lost for many years, and the person who was using it, I had no idea they were using it, and they developed lung problems because they were using it in a closed area and they were filling the room with ozone. And so here they were trying to solve other problems and they developed new problems. So that can happen. So while we're at this violet ray device, let's talk about it a bit. You can watch one of my videos I've done on this in the past, several years ago. So you can see this is a violet color. Well, I'd have to turn the lights off so you'd really see it. This is the one I use for a comb hair. But you can smell, so the ozone will appear on the skin, and you'll be able to smell the smell of ozone once you do that. Now, this is very little bit, and so in a big open room, it's not going to be that noticeable. But when I was poisoned in another house, yes, 2 houses now, from methane poisoning and mold, and that's when I went off to Canada for 7 months back during coronavirus, I was so delirious and out of it, I never even bothered to use this violet ray device. And what happened was I eventually worked myself up to do it. And after a I lost the circulation in my legs. So it was like going up and I was like, I'm dying here. Like literally, it was really bad. And other health issues I was going through because of that. Another really bad landlord experience. So what happened was I used this, and I often tell this story in my meetings, and within a very short time I was fully recovered, and then some. So what happened was, since I was focused on my legs, I had two problems on my legs. One was, I used to do kickboxing and martial arts when I was younger, and I had done serious damage to my veins in my legs, on my feet, and everybody told me that there's no repairs for that. So what happened is I used this, and it's going to be partly because of the ozone, but more than that. And now my legs are like, the veins aren't the way they were, and they're back to normal. And I've got feet like teenagers. I always joke about feeling like I'm 17, but my feet look it. So anyway, I was also thought, well, I lost half of my big toes in circuit. I didn't have any feeling in because I got frostbite maybe 30 years ago, and so the big toe went down diagonally like that, and the outside I didn't feel it, couldn't feel anything. So now they've come back, I can feel them, and I wasn't expecting that. So you call that reversing nerve damage. So you have, with the violet ray, just really briefly describing it, you have two different, you saw the argon color there, which is most of them. Right, so these are some of these attachments I've never seen before, and I've been promoting this and using this for 20 years or more. And I hadn't even seen some of these attachments here. So this one would be the neon. This is for lighter applications where people use them for skin, get rid of your wrinkles and all that. Let's see when you do. Anyway, I'm not really here to talk about violet ray device, but I wanted to mention it. So it will produce ozone. And I had completely crushed a finger. One of these fingers to be 1 millimeter thick with magnets, big huge magnets, got stuck, or they crushed this one finger. It was either that one or this one. And so it was 1 millimeter. If I had gone to the hospital, they would have just snipped it off. There would have been nothing they could have done with it. But I actually used the ozone generator 4 times a day with arnica. And after 6 weeks, got functionality. And sometime after that, it completely healed. There's no scarring, nothing. So that was crazy. Never expected that to happen. So let's move on then to another book. So, I could go through Tesla's patent here, but it's pretty straightforward. Of course, they didn't know really about the details of oxygen back then so much. So this is a book that I also mention frequently, A Working Manual of High Frequency Currents by Noble M. Eberhard. This is 1913, I believe. Yeah, second edition, I think, 1913. And this is written. This guy's got more credentials than anybody today. And this is a book for doctors. You know, AM, PhD, MD, everything else. This was at the pioneer days. So they can't medically advise people to use this in America. They do other countries. They will not accept any testimony about it, period, since like the 50s. So I'm surprised that they would still even talk about allow it for ozone generators and not forbid that. But it is actually a big part of industry. You don't have a lot of knowledge of it in the regular population, but in industry it is pretty big. So you can do searches on that on the internet and see. So yeah, let's talk about the applications in that. So to be most effective, you want to seal up the room. And so it's taking the existing oxygen, breaking it down, recombining, so that so there's, you know, it's going to be also very, very fast acting. So even with this, in a bigger room like this, it will be very noticeable right away. Like you will smell that after a couple of minutes on the other side of the room. People walk in the room and they smell, well, what's that, right? So it's not like carbon monoxide, but it would have the same effects towards you, probably even faster than carbon monoxide maybe, depending on how fast it's produced, I guess. But this is easy to produce. So carbon monoxide you can't detect, and you'll just fall asleep and die. Ozone, you'll get your warning before that. But people would, if you were locked in a room, you would die pretty quickly from the ozone. So it's no joke, nothing to mess around with. I mean, if you're exposed to it, it's not gonna, like if you take a big breath, it's not gonna permanently damage. Probably not permanently damage. I don't know. I can't say for sure. I have to be careful here what I say. But what I'm saying is that you can breathe it and feel very uncomfortable momentarily and go away. It's any kind of longer term, and that's not very long, to have some damage that could be permanent. I don't know the exact amount of time, but it would be something that you'd at least get a headache from, deprived of oxygen, because even though it is oxygen molecule, or it is an oxygen molecule, it's ozone, like even though it's 3 atoms, it's still not, just like carbon monoxide, 1 oxygen is in that, it still can be deadly. You can't use it, your lungs won't be able to absorb it. So sealing up a room, so typically what I do is seal up a room as much as possible, let it take its time. If it's really bad, like 2 days. But you have to be aware now of this. It can oxidize your electronics. So in the same way, you think of a copper bus bar that's not coated, and it will gradually oxidize, right? It will change color. And so the same way electronics can be degraded and ruined by ozone. So that is something definitely to consider if you're ever going to do something. Like maybe, like, well, for me, like when I did it in my car, I wasn't going to do it very long because I don't want it affecting the electronics in the car. So you can have shorter times of it. But when you have a massive mold situation, you're going to have to do it for a good 2 days. And then you're, like if you had it in behind the wall but there was no, it was sealed up, then you'd have to put a hole in it and then make sure the ozone goes in there. So it is a massive, it's a major difference between demolishing a whole building structure and actually salvaging it. And that's something, like my mother saw stuff that was full with mold and it was gone off of the fabric. I mean, it had not time to eat through the fabric, it was just on the surface of it. And yeah, I could probably show the picture of the, let's see if I can pull it up here, that she just sent. It was quite, just so I can tell you the picture that she sent. So those were full of mold. So she had made these, I don't know how many years ago. And, well, I guess these were wooden structures, so these weren't fabric. Until I open it up right now. Well, there's a little bit of fabric wrapped around the neck of one of them. But otherwise, she would have just thrown those away. You know, some of that sentimental, I guess. So, all right, so in applications, yeah, it's a very strong sterilizer. And, you know, oh, so one of the other, that's what I was going to say, when I was thinking of this, I was trying to remember what was the other application for this. So there are some products that sell for the washing machine, and even they'll have an attached or a tube going out that can go into your kitchen area and your kitchen sink. So you have ozonated water. It's a very little amount. So in your laundry, so when the water's flowing into the laundry washing machine, it'll turn the ozone on and just pump in a little bit. And they have like variable amounts that you can use. And then your clothes will come out fresh, like really fresh smelling. I mean, I let my clothes dry outside even in the winter, and there's quite nothing like it, but you know, using something like that would add that kind of disinfectant. So, I mean, I wouldn't be drinking ozonated water, really. I mean, there might be some very small amounts. I don't know the answers to that. But you're going to have to be very careful whatever you do. So what else? So, like I said, there's these products where people will have them plug into the socket, the plug in the wall, and they'll just put out a little bit of ozone. Maybe you have a timer on it. So I said to my mother, in that crawl space, because you're always going to have water in there because that's where the sump pump is, and so I said, you know, maybe once a week, like in this case, like we had sealed up the door, so she's not going to want to do that every time, but I said, well, maybe you run it until you can start smelling it coming out, so maybe only half an hour in there, and then just turn it off. Maybe do that once a week, keep it up. In fact, just before I did this, there was a bucket of water down there in my basement here, and it got a little damp down there as a result, because there was, every time I changed the water filter, or the water filter, I dumped the water in that bucket, and it's kind of accumulated. So I literally just did that before I did this video. So it's kind of funny. So yeah, there's a lot of applications here. And I think we covered everything in the application area. So just again, the danger, you don't want to breathe this in. You want to think it through, prepare. So after you've done it, like in her case, my mother's case, when we did it in the garage, and we just opened up the garage, and even though it had been running for a day, you know, within a very short time, it was fine to go in there. Like, even after an hour, it was no big deal. And so, like I said, the air will come in there, the regular air, and then the ozone will just revert back to oxygen and other things. So I think that's all I can say right now, and I hope that this helps somebody. I know I said to my mother, I said, well, you're the best person to tell this to, because you're going to be on the phone with everybody. So as I was leaving, there she was on the phone. I can't believe it. This ozone thing really worked. So there you go. I'm really happy with that. I really know that this video can, you know, maybe make a huge difference. And if it was well known, I just think of all the ailments that people are going through, all the problems that they have just because of this one thing alone. And they don't even realize they got mold. And people are sick from that. And I was thinking too of during those years, about 4 years ago, I won't mention any key words right now just so I don't get flagged, but they made everybody germaphobes. Now, I used to work in medical health for 3 years. I was like a nurse in the sense of, I was a residential counselor doing all the stuff that, you know, you do as nursing. And we had people that were mentally and physically challenged that we were dealing with and serving. And some of them were, I remember they were germophobic. And so we were, you know, taught to have to deal with them in a certain way, and that this was a problem that they had, like a mental problem. And yet, what we were taught 4 years ago was making everybody that. Exactly, to be as paranoid and afraid, and exactly the way we were taught to try and help people not be. Right? So, just a point to make there. But for those people, I'm sure they will like this video, except for maybe those comments there, that if you're also hyper worried about this little sort of imaginary thing that actually doesn't even exist, well, I'm sure this thing will kill it. So with that, I'll end it there. Thanks for watching.